In the Golden Valleys of Wyoming Territory, 1885, three prosperous ranchers face a shared challenge: the crushing loneliness of success. Each man had carved his fortune from the wilderness, building sprawling cattle empires that stretched as far as the eye could see. But empty houses echo with silence, and cold dinners await solitary men. Their solution seems simple enough: bring in mail-order wives from back east to manage their households and warm their hearts. What arrives is everything they dreamed. Of three accomplished ladies, each carrying letters of recommendation and promises of devotion. But beneath their proper manners and gentle smiles, these women harbor dark secrets that threaten to destroy everything these hard-working cowboys have built. What sinister plot could drive three seemingly proper ladies to betray the very men who offered them a chance at a new life? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weathered property deed hung in Jackson Wade's study, its ornate calligraphy declaring the founding of the Triple Crown Ranch Alliance. Beneath the glass frame, three signatures testified to a brotherhood forged not by blood, but by shared dreams and calloused hands. The deed bore witness to how three men had transformed 10,000 acres of Wyoming wilderness into the territory's most prosperous cattle operation. Jackson Wade, at 42, carried himself with the quiet authority of a natural leader. His silver-streaked dark hair and weather-lined face spoke of long days studying the lay of the land, planning cattle drives and negotiating contracts with eastern buyers. In town, folks called him Judge Wade, not because he held any official position, but because of his reputation for fairness and measured wisdom in settling disputes. Samuel Morris, the eldest at 45, had forgotten more about cattle than most ranchers would ever know. His specialty was breeding stock, with an almost mystical ability to select bulls that would strengthen the herd. A widower of 15 years, he'd raised the Triple Crown's reputation by developing a distinctive breed that thrived in Wyoming's harsh climate. The empty chair at his dinner table reminded him nightly of Sarah, his wife of barely 2 years, taken by fever before they could start a family. Thomas Blackwood, 39 and the youngest of the three, had earned his reputation as the finest horseman in 3 territories. His gift for gentling wild horses matched his skill at training ranch hands, though lately the young cowboys he mentored seemed to remind him more of his own passing youth. His ranch house, the newest of the 3, remained eerily pristine, lacking the warm touches that only a woman's presence could provide. The 3 properties formed a rough triangle, with shared grazing lands at the center, their cattle bearing. The distinctive Triple Crown brand roamed freely across the combined acreage, tended by crews that answered to all 3 men. It was an arrangement that had served them well for 12 years, built on trust as solid as the granite outcroppings that marked their western boundary. Yet success, for all its rewards, couldn't warm a man's bones on a cold Wyoming night. Jackson's library of leather-bound books offered companionship of a sort, but couldn't pour coffee at sunrise or share thoughts about the day's concerns. Samuel's prize bulls might bring top dollar at auction, but they couldn't ease the ache of returning to empty rooms each evening. And Thomas's string of magnificent horses, for all their spirit, couldn't replace the gentle laughter he yearned to hear echoing through his hallways. They discussed it first during the autumn cattle drive, huddled around a campfire while their men slept nearby. The topic arose casually, a mention of how Old Man Henderson's mail-order bride had transformed not just his house, but the man himself. The idea took root slowly, like winter wheat waiting for spring thaw. A man needs something more than cattle and coins to make a life whole, Samuel had mused, stirring the coffee grounds in his tin cup. Sarah taught me that. Brief as our time was. Jackson nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. The territory's changing. Railroads bringing civilization closer every year. Might be time we changed too. Thomas, usually the most reserved about personal matters, surprised them both. "Reckon I've broken every wild horse worth breaking," he said softly. "But a empty house, that's a different kind of challenge." The decision once made felt right, like the first rain after a long drought. They would seek wives from back east, women of refinement and education who could help transform their profitable ranch alliance into something greater, a legacy worth passing on. None of them could have known then that their shared dream would become a weapon aimed at their very survival. The property deed caught the late afternoon sun, casting shadows across the signatures that had sealed their partnership. Soon, those same signatures would appear on another document, one that would bring 3 women west, each carrying letters of recommendation that read like promises of salvation. But promises, like the Wyoming spring, could be deceptive, fair on the surface, while concealing treacherous depths beneath. The letter from Hawthorne's matrimonial agency arrived on creamy stationery, bearing a Boston return address and the kind of elegant penmanship that spoke of Eastern refinement. Reverend Mills studied it carefully in his sun-washed study while the 3 ranchers waited, each trying not to show his anxiety. "Mrs. Hawthorne comes highly recommended," the Reverend said finally, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Several respectable families in Cheyenne have successfully arranged marriages through her agency." He cleared his throat, careful with his next words. "Though I must caution you, bringing Eastern ladies to Wyoming territory requires particular consideration." Jackson leaned forward in his chair, its leather creaking beneath his weight. "We've discussed the challenges, Reverend. Our houses are solid, our finances secure. We can offer comfort and stability." "It's not the material considerations that concern me," Reverend Mills replied. "It's the adjustment. These women will be leaving everything familiar behind. That kind of change can strain even the strongest character." Samuel's weather-worn fingers traced the edge of his hat brim. "Sarah, my first wife, she came from back east, made the adjustment just fine until—" His voice trailed off, the old grief still raw. "And that's precisely why we're seeking your counsel," Thomas added quietly. "We aim to do this properly, with guidance and forethought." The Reverend nodded, reaching for his pen and ministerial letterhead. "Then let me help you craft your advertisements. The right words matter in these situations. They must be honest but hopeful, clear about expectations while leaving room for genuine connection." Together, they composed 3 separate notices, each tailored to reflect its author's character and circumstances. Jackson's emphasized his library and the cultural opportunities he hoped to develop in the growing territory. Samuel wrote of his love for the land and his dream of building a lasting legacy. Thomas, after much consideration, spoke of his work with horses and his belief in gentle patience. Mrs. Hawthorne's response arrived 2 weeks later, written in that same refined hand. She understood perfectly what they sought, she assured them. Her agency specialized in matching accomplished Eastern ladies with Western gentlemen of substance. She had several candidates in mind, educated women of proper background and gentle breeding, each seeking a fresh start in the expanding territories. "References will be provided, of course," her letter promised, "and I personally interview each candidate to ensure suitability of character and temperament." The photographs arrived next. 3 women whose posed studio portraits spoke of quiet dignity and careful preparation. Elizabeth Porter, a widow of 32, whose letter to Jackson displayed a knowledge of literature that matched his own. Sarah Mitchell, 28 and never married, wrote to Thomas of her love for horses and her desire for open spaces. Mary Hamilton, 35, corresponded with Samuel about her experience managing her father's household and her dreams of helping build something meaningful in the West. Their letters were everything the men could have hoped for, articulate, thoughtful, and filled with small details that hinted at deeper character. Yet later, much later, they would remember Reverend Mills's slight frown as he reviewed the women's references. "These are all in order," he said slowly, "though I notice they're all from Boston." Curious, for ladies supposedly from different parts of the East. Boston's a center of culture and education, Jackson replied. Makes sense they'd all have connections there. The Reverend nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. Just remember, paper can carry any words a person chooses to write upon it. True character reveals itself through actions, not letters. But the excitement of possibility had already taken hold. The men began preparing their homes with renewed energy. Jackson added to his library, ordering books he thought Elizabeth might enjoy. Thomas built a new stable, imagining teaching Sarah to ride Wyoming horses. Samuel planted a garden, remembering how his first wife had loved fresh flowers. Spring was coming to Wyoming territory, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. As the three men finalized arrangements for their bride's travel, none of them noticed how the letters from Boston, laid side by side, shared certain peculiarities. A phrase and pen stroke, subtle signs that would later seem as obvious as tracks in fresh snow. In his study, Reverend Mills filed away his copies of the marriage arrangements, adding a private note of his own. May God grant these good men the wisdom to see clearly and the strength to face whatever comes. It was a prayer he would remember. In the months ahead, when the true nature of their mail-order brides began to reveal itself, 3 letters lay spread across Jackson's mahogany desk, each bearing the same Boston postmark, yet telling distinctly different stories. The first, from Elizabeth Porter, was written in an elegant hand that spoke of years of formal education. The paper itself was expensive, the kind used by merchants and bankers, and carried a subtle lavender scent. "My dear Mr. Wade," her letter began, "I cannot express how your description of your library stirred my heart. Since losing my husband to consumption 3 years ago, I have found solace in literature, particularly Shakespeare's sonnets and the works of Mr. Emerson. The prospect of sharing philosophical discussions while helping to build a cultural legacy in Wyoming territory fills me with profound purpose." Jackson traced the careful loops of her signature, imagining the refined widow who had penned such thoughtful words. Yet he missed the slight inconsistency, how the ink's shade varied between the body of the letter and the signature, as if written at different times. The second letter, addressed to Thomas Blackwood, bore Sarah Mitchell's bold, confident script. "Your description of breaking horses reminded me of my grandfather's stable in Virginia," she wrote. "Though I've never ventured west of the Mississippi, I've grown up around horses and understand their noble spirits. A woman, like a wild mare, must be free to run before she can truly settle into a home." Thomas had read these words countless times, drawing hope from her apparent understanding of his life's work. He failed to notice how her mentioned grandfather's stable shifted location from Virginia to Kentucky in subsequent correspondence. Mary Hamilton's letter to Samuel was the most practical of the 3, filled with detailed questions about household management and ranch operations. "Having managed my father's household since my mother's passing," she explained, "I understand the complexity of running a successful estate. My experience with accounts and staff supervision could prove valuable to your ranching enterprise." Her references spoke of her efficiency in managing her father's Boston mansion, though none mentioned the curious fact that no Hamilton mansion existed in Boston's registered properties. Each letter was accompanied by a daguerreotype, carefully staged portraits that showed women of obvious refinement. Elizabeth Porter appeared scholarly yet elegant, her dark hair swept up in the latest Eastern fashion, a book held carefully. In her lap, Sarah Mitchell's image captured a younger woman with clear eyes and a direct gaze, wearing a riding habit that hinted at her proclaimed equestrian background. Mary Hamilton's portrait was the most conservative, presenting a woman of mature beauty and obvious capability. The women's correspondence had grown more frequent over the past month as travel arrangements were finalized. Their letters arrived together each Wednesday, sharing news of preparations and growing anticipation. None of the men noticed how the 3 women never referenced each other, despite supposedly sharing the same boarding house while awaiting departure. "I've secured passage on the Union Pacific," Elizabeth wrote to Jackson. "First-class accommodation, as befits a lady traveling alone." She didn't mention the two companions who would share her journey. "The timing seems providential," Sarah assured Thomas. "Spring is the perfect season for new beginnings." She failed to explain how she had coordinated her arrival with the others. Mary's letters to Samuel grew increasingly detailed about her plans for managing his household. "I have experience with cattle ledgers," she noted, though her supposed Boston background made such knowledge unlikely. As the appointed day drew closer, anticipation built among the three ranchers. They shared excerpts from their letters over evening meals, each man quietly confident in his choice. The women's words painted pictures of grace, competence, and shared values, everything they had hoped to find. In his study, Jackson carefully filed away Elizabeth's letters in his desk drawer, missing how the paper's watermark didn't match its supposed age. Thomas added Sarah's daguerreotype to his bedside table, unaware that her riding habit bore a maker's mark from a shop that wouldn't open for another year. Samuel noted Mary's references in his ledger, never thinking to verify the Boston addresses she had provided. Spring winds swept across the Wyoming prairie, carrying the scent of new grass and coming change. 3 women's letters traveled east, on the same stage that would soon carry their authors west, each envelope containing carefully crafted promises. But promises, like spring in Wyoming, could hide sharp surprises beneath their gentle surface. The train's whistle echoed across the Wyoming prairie that April morning, its sound carrying promise and portent in equal measure. Cheyenne's newly completed station platform teemed with unusual activity. 3 prosperous ranchers in their Sunday best, accompanied by Reverend Mills and a small welcoming party from town. The incoming train's steam billowed white against the blue spring sky, its iron wheels grinding to a halt with a sound like fate's own timepiece marking a crucial hour. Elizabeth Porter was the first to descend, her dark traveling dress impeccably tailored, her composure perfect despite the long journey. She moved with the grace of old money, though the porter who handled her luggage might have wondered why its hardware bore marks of recent manufacture despite its artificially distressed leather. "Mr. Wade," she said, extending a gloved hand to Jackson, "your letters hardly did justice to the majesty of this country." Her voice carried the cultured tones of Boston's finest finishing schools, yet a careful ear might have caught the occasional slip, moments when a harder accent threatened to emerge. Sarah Mitchell followed, her younger face bright with seemingly genuine enthusiasm. She wore a practical traveling suit that nevertheless spoke of quality, and her eyes lit up at the sight of the horses waiting to carry their luggage. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted Thomas, "I see you've brought exactly the sort of mount I'd choose for myself." Her knowledge of horses was evident, though later Thomas would struggle to reconcile this with the conflicting details of where she'd learned to ride. Mary Hamilton's arrival was marked by its efficiency. She descended with a count book in hand, already making notes about the journey. "Mr. Morris," she addressed Samuel, her manner both respectful and assured, "I trust you've received my instructions about preparing the household." The papers she carried bore official-looking stamps, yet their ink was oddly fresh for documents supposedly months old. Reverend Mills observed the reunions with careful attention, noting how the 3 women exchanged brief glances when they thought no one was watching. Their train tickets, collected by the station master, showed 3 separate journeys merged into one: Boston to New York, New York to Chicago, Chicago to Cheyenne. Yet the creases and wear on the tickets didn't match their supposed week-long journey. The ceremonies were conducted that same afternoon in the town's small church. The Reverend had suggested a longer engagement period, but the women spoke convincingly of propriety and the need to establish themselves in their new homes quickly. 3 simple services, performed one after another, with the other couples standing, witness for each union, Elizabeth's vows were delivered with perfect poise, her responses clear and measured. If Jackson noticed how she stumbled slightly over her stated birthplace, the emotion of the moment covered the discrepancy. Sarah's ceremony was marked by what appeared to be genuine tears, though Thomas didn't see how quickly they dried when she thought his attention had shifted. Mary approached her vows like a business contract, efficient and proper, while Samuel was too moved by memories of his first wedding to notice her carefully neutral expressions. As the sun set behind the church's modest steeple, 3 new couples emerged. The townsfolk who had gathered to witness the ceremonies saw exactly what they expected: successful ranchers and their eastern brides beginning new lives in the promising territory. They missed the swift, knowing looks that passed between the women as they prepared to depart for their separate homes. "Remember," Elizabeth whispered to her companions while the men arranged the carriages, "patience in all things." Her words carried layers of meaning that would only become clear in the months ahead. The 3 couples departed in different directions: Jackson and Elizabeth toward the northern property, Thomas and Sarah to the east, Samuel and Mary to the western ranch. The setting sun painted the scene in shades of gold and shadow, a fitting backdrop for a day filled with both promise and hidden purpose. In his church office, Reverend Mills sat down to record the marriages in the parish register. He paused, pen hovering over the paper, struck by an odd detail he couldn't quite place: the women's signatures in the marriage records, though written minutes apart, shared subtle characteristics that suggested a common hand had practiced them repeatedly. But by the time this detail would become significant, the ink would be long dried and the deception well underway. Elizabeth Porter Wade's journal lay hidden beneath a false bottom in her writing desk, its pages filled with an entirely different hand than her carefully cultivated social correspondence. Gone were the refined loops and graceful flourishes, replaced by sharp, decisive strokes that revealed both urgency and calculation. "First week progressing as planned," she wrote by lamplight, while Jackson slept in their newly shared bedroom down the hall. "The Wade Ranch operations are more extensive than our intelligence suggested. Their cattle operation alone is worth twice our initial estimate. Sarah reports similar findings at Blackwood's estate, though she nearly slipped today when discussing Virginia hunt clubs that never existed. By day, Elizabeth played the role of refined Eastern wife with perfect precision. She arranged Jackson's library with apparent care, discussing Emerson and Thoreau over morning coffee. Her suggestions for household improvements were subtle and well received. If the ranch hands noticed that she spent unusual amounts of time studying the property maps in Jackson's study, they attributed it to natural curiosity. At the Morris Ranch, Mary's efficiency masked her thoroughness in examining Samuel's business records. "The ledgers are exactly where we need them to be," she wrote in coded messages left in hollow tree trunks along the property line. "But there's a complication. Morris keeps duplicate books in a private safe. I'll need more time to access them." She maintained her cover through meticulous attention to the household, introducing new filing systems for ranch records that Samuel welcomed as improvements. Yet her organization served a dual purpose, making it easier to track the ranch's operations and vulnerabilities. Each evening, she compiled detailed notes about cattle movements and guard schedules, hiding them within her seemingly innocent household accounts. Sarah's approach at the Blackwood Ranch was more direct, leveraging Thomas's growing affection to gain access to his prized horses. "The stallions alone would fetch enough to fund the next phase," she reported during clandestine midnight meetings with her conspirators. "But we must move carefully. Blackwood knows every horse like family." Their weekly gatherings, disguised as innocent social calls between new neighbors, allowed the women to coordinate their efforts. They met in the guise of sharing housekeeping tips and easing their transition to ranch life, while beneath the pleasant conversation ran currents of careful calculation. "Mary's right about the timing," Elizabeth wrote in her hidden journal. We'll need at least 3 months to set everything in place. The Land Office records confirm what we suspected. The Triple Crown water rights are the key to controlling the entire valley. Once those rights are compromised, the rest will fall into place. Yet life has a way of complicating even the most carefully laid plans. Sarah found herself unexpectedly moved by Thomas's gentle manner with his horses, his patience as he taught her to ride Western style. Mary discovered that Samuel's quiet grief over his first wife stirred unwelcome echoes of her own lost family. Even Elizabeth, despite her iron resolve, caught herself genuinely laughing at Jackson's dry wit over their evening discussions of literature. "Sentiment is our greatest enemy," she reminded her companions during their next meeting. "Remember what brought us here. Remember who sent us." But her journal entries began to show traces of doubt, questioning details of their plan that she had never before considered challenging. The men, wrapped in the warmth of new marriage and hope, missed the small signs that might have warned them. They didn't notice how their wives' stories sometimes shifted under direct questions, or how certain details of their past lives remained conspicuously vague. When Elizabeth claimed a headache to avoid meeting an actual Boston acquaintance of Jackson's, he merely showed concern for her comfort. Samuel found Mary's late-night study of his ranch records endearing, evidence of her dedication to their shared future. Thomas saw Sarah's intense interest in his property boundaries as natural curiosity about her new home. Each man, in his own way, was gradually revealing the inner workings of the Triple Crown Empire to the very women who planned its destruction. But as spring deepened towards summer, the weight of their deception began to tell on the women in unexpected ways. Elizabeth's journal entries grew increasingly conflicted, torn between her mission and the life she found herself creating. "The problem," she wrote in one late-night entry, "is that they are good men, far better than our intelligence suggested, which means what we're planning to do to them is far worse than we initially believed." The telegram arrived at Cheyenne's Western Union office in the late afternoon, its coded message appearing innocent enough to the young operator who transmitted it. "Spring fabric shipment. Delayed, stop weather affecting cattle markets, stop expect price, adjustments by harvest, stop." But in Elizabeth's hands, the seemingly mundane business correspondence revealed a darker purpose. Jackson found her burning the telegram in his study's fireplace, though he didn't question why his wife would destroy what appeared to be routine correspondence. Instead, he brought her news that made the telegram's hidden message suddenly urgent. 40 head missing from the North pasture, he reported, his voice heavy with concern. "Good breeding stock, every one of them. Todd found tracks leading to Thunder Basin, but they vanished near the creek bed." He didn't notice how Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she stirred the telegram's ashes. Similar reports emerged. From all 3 ranches, Thomas's prize stallion, a magnificent bay he'd been training for the territorial fair, disappeared without a trace. Samuel's southern fence line showed signs of tampering, with cattle tracks leading through gaps that hadn't existed the day before. Mary maintained her efficient manner as she documented the losses in Samuel's ledgers, but her evening notes to her conspirators carried a tone of warning. "Movement too obvious," she wrote in careful cipher. "Suspicions rising. Local hands discussing night patrols. Strange men began appearing at the edges of Triple Crown territory, rough-looking cowboys who claimed to be looking for work, yet never stayed in one place long enough to be hired. They watched the ranches from distant ridgelines, their presence raising hackles among the experienced hands. Sarah's rides with Thomas increasingly took them to disputed boundaries, where she asked careful questions about water rights and grazing agreements. "It seems so complex," she observed with calculated innocence. "How do you prove who owns what out here?" Her questions seemed natural enough, but they probed specific weaknesses in the Triple Crown's legal positions. The women continued their weekly gatherings, But now their social visits carried an edge of urgency. Their conversations, once they were sure of privacy, took on a harder tone. "The buyers are getting impatient," Elizabeth whispered during one such meeting. "They want proof we can deliver what was promised." The coded telegram had made that clear enough. Their employers were tired of waiting. "The land office clerk is ready to help," Mary reported. "But he needs copies of the original water rights documents. They have to be the originals. No, forgeries will pass inspection." Sarah's news was equally pressing. "Thomas is planning to register his new breeding program. Once those bloodlines are officially documented, they'll be harder to move without questions." Yet even as they plotted, the women found themselves increasingly tangled in the lives they were meant to destroy. Elizabeth caught herself genuinely helping Jackson draft proposals for expanding the ranch's operations. Mary's efficiency had actually improved Samuel's bookkeeping, making the ranch more profitable. Sarah's suggestions for the horse program showed real insight, earning Thomas's deepening trust. The men, meanwhile, began sharing their own concerns over evening pipes and brandy. "Cattle don't just vanish," Samuel observed, reviewing the latest loss figures. "Not without help." "Been seeing too many strange faces lately," Thomas added. "Riders who don't belong, asking questions they shouldn't." Jackson remained thoughtful, remembering Elizabeth's burned telegram. "Maybe it's time we hired more night riders, posted extra hands along the property lines." The shadow men on the ridgelines watched these preparations with interest, sending their own coded messages to unseen employers. The pieces were moving into place, but not fast enough for some players in this dangerous game. That night, Elizabeth made another entry in her hidden journal, her usual precise handwriting showing signs of stress. "Time grows short. The others press for faster action, but moving too quickly risks everything. These men are not fools. They've built too much to be careless with its protection." She paused, listening to Jackson's steady breathing from their bedroom down the hall. "Strange," she wrote finally, "how the most dangerous moment in a deception comes when it begins to feel less like a lie." The forged land deed lay between them on Thomas's desk like a snake in the grass, its careful penmanship betrayed by the evening lamplight. Sarah's face remained composed, but her fingers worked the edge of her riding skirt, a tell Thomas had never noticed until this moment. "Would you care to explain," he said quietly, "why you were meeting James Carlton at the Eagle Creek property line? And why our survey markers have been moved 50 yards onto Triple Crown land?" His voice carried none of its usual gentle humor. In his hand, he held the deed that would have transferred water rights from his property to Carlton's, with Sarah's practiced signature clearly visible at the bottom. He had followed her that afternoon, his years of tracking experience finally turned toward his own wife. The sight of her sharing documents with Carlton behind a stand of cottonwoods had stopped his breath like a physical blow. "It's not what you believe," Sarah began, but her usual confidence wavered. Carlton wasn't supposed to be caught with the deed. That had been Elizabeth's explicit instruction, all preparations in place before any documents surfaced. "What I believe," Thomas cut in, "is that my wife of 3 months was attempting to sell off water rights that have belonged to this ranch for 12 years. Rights that would strangle our entire operation if lost." He touched the deed with one weathered finger. "What I don't yet believe is why." Elizabeth and Mary arrived within the hour, summoned by Sarah's urgent message. They found the ranch house silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Their practiced concern for their friend met Thomas's level gaze. "Ladies," he said from behind his desk, "perhaps you can help me understand something about property law in Boston." The deed still lay before him, its forged signatures damning in the lamplight. "Is it common there for wives to conduct land transactions without their husband's knowledge?" Elizabeth's composure never wavered, though Mary's sharp intake of breath betrayed her surprise. This wasn't how it was supposed to unfold. The careful plans, the coordinated timing, all threatened by one careless afternoon meeting. Sarah was merely consulting about boundary issues, Elizabeth offered smoothly. You know how confusing these old property lines can be. Consulting? Thomas's laugh held no warmth. With signed transfer deeds in hand, with Carlton's men already moving our survey markers. He rose slowly, his height suddenly imposing in the study's confined space. Try again, Mrs. Wade. And this time, remember you're talking to a man who's spent his life reading tracts. The women exchanged glances, years of partnership, allowing silent communication. Sarah gave an almost imperceptible nod. Thomas, she said softly, you have to understand, the territory is changing. Small ranches can't survive without adjustments. Adjustments? His voice remained deadly quiet. Is that what you call selling out your husband's birthright? An adjustment? Elizabeth stepped forward, her refined manner now a shield. Mr. Blackwood, surely we can discuss this like civilized people. Perhaps over dinner, Samuel and Jackson should be included in any serious property discussions. But Thomas had spent too many years reading horse behavior not to recognize mounting tension. The women's careful positioning, their too casual suggestions, every instinct honed by breaking wild stallions, was screaming danger. I've already sent for them, he said, along with Reverend Mills and the sheriff. He noted how Mary's hand twitched toward her reticule, an unusual gesture for a social call. Though I suspect this may go beyond local law enforcement. Sarah made one last attempt. My darling, please, let me explain everything privately. There's so much you don't understand about my position. Your position. Thomas touched the forged deed again. I understand your position perfectly now. What I don't understand is how deep this betrayal goes. He looked at Elizabeth and Mary, or how many people are involved in it. The grandfather clock struck the hour, its chimes echoing through the tense room. Somewhere in the growing darkness, horses approached, Jackson and Samuel arriving, unaware they were riding into a confrontation that would shake the Triple Crown to its foundations. Elizabeth's hand found the telegram hidden in her sleeve. If she could just get word to their employers, there might still be a way to salvage the operation. But looking at Thomas's face, she realized with growing dread that the careful mask they'd constructed was already cracking beyond repair. Deed. Yellowed newspaper clipping from the Chicago Tribune, dated 3 years prior, lay stark against Jackson's polished desk. Its headline told a story none of them had suspected. Notorious sisters escape justice in Kansas land fraud. Below it, 3 sketch portraits bore unmistakable resemblances to their wives, though under different names. Found this in a stack of old papers at the land office, Sheriff Matthews explained, his weathered face grave. Agent there recognized Mrs. Wade's handwriting from some documents she'd filed last week, started digging deeper after that. Jackson studied the article with the same careful attention he'd once given Elizabeth's love letters. The Carson sisters, he read aloud, his voice hollow, wanted in connection with land schemes across 4 states. His finger traced the lines of text. Eldest sister Margaret, known for impersonating wealthy widows. Middle sister Rebecca, who poses as horse trainer's daughter. Youngest sister Catherine, expert in document forgery. Samuel's hands gripped his chair until his knuckles whitened. Mary's handwriting, he said quietly. It matches the sister who specialized in forgery. I found altered numbers in my ledgers last night. Subtle changes dating back weeks. The evidence, once they began looking, mounted like storm clouds before a tempest. Thomas spread out a collection of documents across the desk. Property deeds, bank drafts, letters of introduction. All forgeries, all masterfully crafted. They've done this before, Sheriff Matthews continued, pulling out more clippings. Nebraska, 82, posed as teachers to gain access to land grant documents. Missouri, 83, infiltrated a mining company through marriage to the owners. Kansas, 84, nearly succeeded in stealing an entire cattle operation through forged inheritance papers. But why here? Thomas asked, though the answer was already forming. Why the Triple Crown? Jackson unrolled a territory map, its boundaries, marked with recent railroad surveys. Because we control the water, he said grimly. Without the Triple Crown's water rights, none of the new rail stations can operate. We're not just talking about cattle anymore. We're talking about controlling the entire territory's future development. The sheriff nodded. Railroads offering fortunes for those rights, and there are plenty of men willing to pay well for someone to acquire them quietly. A telegram arrived from the Pinkerton agency in Denver, adding more pieces to the puzzle. The Carson sisters had connections to some of the territory's most ruthless land speculators. Their standard method was to marry into profitable ranches, systematically undermine operations from within, then vanish with property deeds and bank drafts, leaving ruined men behind. 7 marriages between them, Samuel read from the report, his voice bitter, all dissolved or abandoned once they got what they wanted. He thought of Mary's efficient handling of his accounts, seeing now how her organization had really been careful preparation for theft. Thomas laid out Sarah's forged deed beside similar documents from previous schemes. Same hand, same technique. They've been perfecting this for years. But it was the final piece of evidence that struck deepest. In Elizabeth's writing desk, hidden beneath that false bottom, Jackson found letters dating back months before their marriages. They detailed every aspect of the Triple Crown's operations, clearly indicating the sisters had been planning this operation long before the first marriage advertisement was placed. "Target ranches identified," Jackson read, his voice controlled despite his pain. "Wade property offers best access to water rights. Blackwood's horses provide immediate capital. Morris's cattle operation ensures long-term leverage. They had us marked before we ever knew they existed." The grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through rooms that had so recently held dreams of family and future. Now those same rooms felt hollow, stripped of warmth by the weight of such calculated betrayal. "Question is," Sheriff Matthews said into the heavy silence, "what do they plan next? Women like this, with their backs against the wall?" He left, the thought unfinished. Samuel gathered the evidence carefully, years of ranch work evident in his methodical movements. "They're still our wives, legally, still have access to our properties, our accounts." "Not for long," Thomas replied, his voice hard. "But first we need to understand exactly what we're facing, how deep this conspiracy goes." Jackson stared at the newspaper sketches of the Carson sisters, seeing now the subtle similarities to the refined women they'd welcomed into their homes and hearts. "No," he said quietly. "First, we need to decide how to confront them with what we know. Because tomorrow morning they'll expect to sit across from us at breakfast still playing their roles, and we need to find out exactly who else is involved in their scheme." In the flickering lantern light of Samuel's root cellar, Jackson sketched their defensive strategy across a weathered piece of parchment. The underground room, used for storing winter vegetables, had become their war room, the only place they could be certain of absolute privacy. 3 key points, Jackson explained, his charcoal stick marking critical locations. The water rights depend on our control of Eagle Creek headwaters, Thunder Basin Reservoir, and the Lower Fork Junction. Lose any one of these, we lose everything. His precise marking showed how the Triple Crown's entire water system was interconnected, a masterpiece of frontier engineering. "Mary's been studying these points for weeks," Samuel added, pointing to notations in his ledger, disguised as routine maintenance records. "But now I see, she's been mapping our vulnerabilities." Thomas traced the creek lines with a calloused finger. "Sarah's rides always seem to circle these areas, testing our security, learning patrol patterns." The betrayal in his voice had hardened to steel, "and Carlton's men have been spotted near each location." The map grew more detailed as they worked, marking patrol routes, guard positions, and potential ambush points. These were men who had spent their lives reading the land, and now they turned that knowledge to its defense. "We can't trust any documents now," Jackson continued, adding another layer of notations. "They'll have forged copies of everything. We need physical control of these points." He marked 3 X's on the map, And we need men we can trust absolutely. Samuel nodded. Toward the cellar steps where Bill Hawkins, their oldest ranch hand, stood guard. Already sent for the old crew. Men who helped us build this place should be here by tomorrow night. Meanwhile, Thomas added, we maintain the pretense. Let them think we're still in the dark. His jaw tightened. Hard as that'll be over. Morning coffee. Jackson's charcoal scratched across the parchment, adding time markers and guard rotations. They'll have a backup plan. Women this clever, they'll have prepared for discovery. He looked up at his friends, his eyes grave in the lantern light. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Samuel pulled out another document, a copy of his original cattle ledger, maintained in secret. Been keeping true numbers separate since I first noticed the discrepancies. We can prove tampering now, show exactly how they've been setting us up. Sheriff Matthews has men watching the telegraph office, Thomas reported. Any messages out will be intercepted, and I've got riders posted on every road to Cheyenne. They won't be able to disappear like they did in Kansas. The plan took shape as the night deepened. Guard positions were assigned, loyal hands selected for crucial posts. They mapped fallback positions and emergency signals, drawing on years of cattle drive experience to secure their perimeter. Dawn patrol changes in 4 hours, Samuel noted, checking his watch. We'll need to be back in our beds before then. Maintaining the illusion, Jackson made final marks on the map, then held it to the lantern for all to see. Memorize your positions. This document doesn't leave this room. The other men nodded. They'd learned the hard way about leaving paper. Trails. One more thing, Thomas said quietly. We need to decide now, when the moment comes, how far are we willing to go? The question hung heavy in the cellar air. These were men of property and law, unused to operating in shadows. Samuel's voice was steady. They've threatened everything we've built, not just our ranches, but the future of this entire territory. He met the other's eyes. We do what needs doing. Jackson rolled the map carefully, his movements deliberate. We're not the men they thought we were. Not helpless eastern marks ready for plucking. We fought Indians, outlaws, and nature herself to build this place. His voice hardened. We can fight this too. They emerged from the root cellar into the pre-dawn chill, each returning to their own ranch by hidden paths they'd known since boyhood. The map remained behind, secured in Samuel's hidden strongbox, but its details were carved into their memories as deeply as the brands on their cattle. In 3 separate ranch houses, 3 men slipped back into bed beside wives who were no longer trusted, each lying awake until the first light of dawn, waiting for whatever the new day would bring. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for their wives to spring it. The lawyer's letter arrived by special courier, its heavy cream, paper bearing the prestigious letterhead of Whitmore, Hayes and Associates, Chicago. Samuel recognized Mary's subtle handiwork in the perfectly forged documentation attached, water rights surveys that seemed to predate the Triple Crown's claims by 5 years. Your continued interference with legitimate water access constitutes actionable harassment, the letter stated in precise legal language. Our clients have demonstrated prior claim through enclosed documentation. Failure to cease operations at Thunder Basin Reservoir within 48 hours will result in immediate legal action. But it was the handwritten note folded within that carried the real threat. Consider carefully how much you're willing to lose before accepting our generous purchase offer. The timing wasn't accidental. 200 head of prime cattle, intended for the Kansas City buyers, were currently trailing north toward Thunder Basin, their only water source for 50 miles. Without that water, the entire herd would be at risk. Samuel found Mary in their kitchen, calmly reviewing household accounts as if she hadn't just threatened to destroy their livelihood. Interesting mail this morning, he said carefully, watching her reaction. Seems we have some water rights disputes to settle. Oh, her practiced concern would have fooled him just days ago. Perhaps I should review the documentation. I've become quite familiar with our property records. I'm sure you have. He kept his voice level, noting how her hand moved slightly toward the hidden pocket in her skirts, where he now knew she kept coded messages for her sisters. The cattle drive reports arrived hourly by rider, each message more urgent than the last. Strange men shadowed the herd's flanks, their presence putting the cattle on edge. Fences appeared across established trails, forcing the herd to bunch up miles from water. At the Blackwood Ranch, Thomas discovered Sarah meeting secretly with his head wrangler, offering money to redirect the herd toward Carlton's property. The man's loyalty proved stronger than her gold, but the attempt showed how desperate their wives had become. Elizabeth's refinement slipped noticeably when Jackson questioned the legal notices. "Surely you don't suspect me of involvement in some conspiracy," she said, but her cultured accent wavered. "I'm your wife, not some common criminal." "Interesting choice of words," Jackson replied mildly. "I don't recall mentioning criminals." He watched her face carefully, seeing the momentary flash of calculation behind her eyes. The cattle drive pushed on through the gathering crisis, trail hands working double shifts to keep the herd together. Thunder Basin lay just ahead. Its water's vital not just for this drive, but for the Triple Crown's entire summer operation. Riders reported armed men gathering at the reservoir, their intentions clear even from a distance. The Carson sisters' employers were done with subtle legal maneuvers. They were ready to take what they wanted by force. "You should consider selling now," Mary told Samuel over dinner, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, "before things become uncomfortable. I hear Carlton's offering fair prices given the circumstances." Samuel cut his steak deliberately, buying time to control his anger. "Interesting that you know Carlton's offering prices. Don't recall him making us any formal proposals." In town, telegraph operator Jim Burke passed a coded message to Sheriff Matthews, Elizabeth attempting to contact their Chicago employers. The reply came swiftly. "Proceed as planned. Stop, no more delays. Stop, use whatever means necessary. Stop." Thomas found Sarah in his stables that evening, her practiced composure finally showing cracks. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, not turning to face him. "Nobody was meant to get hurt." "Bit late for that concern," he replied. 200 head of cattle about to die of thirst might disagree. The night brought no relief from the mounting tension. Each ranch house had become a battleground of unspoken threats and subtle positioning. The women maintained their roles with increasing desperation, while their husbands waited for the next move in this deadly game. Near midnight, a fire signal blazed from Thunder Basin, the cattle drive's emergency warning. Samuel read the message with grim understanding. Carlton's men weren't just blocking access to water anymore. They were forcing the herd into box canyons, trapping them in the scorching summer heat. "Time's running out," Mary observed, watching the signal fire from their bedroom window. "Smart men know when to cut their losses." Samuel's response was quiet, but firm. "Smart men also know when they're being played for fools, and when to stop playing along." Mary's letter lay untouched on Samuel's desk, her normally perfect penmanship showing signs of haste and distress. The opening lines told him everything had changed. "My dearest Samuel, by the time you read this, I'll either be dead or gone. There are things you must know. About my sisters, about Carlton, and most importantly about the man really behind all this." He found their bedroom empty, signs of hasty packing evident in the open drawers. But unlike previous disappearances, she'd left behind her forger's kit and account books. More telling was the small photograph hidden beneath them. A worn image of a young Mary with 2 small children, their faces bearing the unmistakable resemblance of family. "We weren't always thieves," the letter continued. "Before Chicago, before Carlton found us, we were just desperate women trying to survive. Elizabeth was Margaret then, a real widow with a sick child. Rebecca, Sarah now, had lost her husband in a mining accident. My own children." The ink blotted here, tears evident on the paper. "Carlton promised us revenge against the banks and railroad men who'd ruined our families, but that was just another lie." Samuel had barely finished reading when Thomas burst in, his face dark with urgency. Sarah's gone, left a note claiming Mary betrayed them. Elizabeth's already sent riders after her. The letter's next passages confirmed their worst fears. Carlton isn't in charge, he's just another front man. The real power is Theodore Whitmore of the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. He's been buying up water rights across 3 territories, choking out small ranchers to control the railway routes. But the Triple Crown was different. You were too strong to buy out, too smart to scare off, so he sent us. Jackson arrived moments later, Elizabeth's mask of refinement finally shattered. "Mary's ruined everything," she raged, her carefully cultivated accent abandoned. 15 years of working our way up to this score, and your soft-hearted sister loses her nerve over some rancher. He's a good man. Mary's letter had anticipated this moment. They all are. Not like the others. We've ruined. Samuel reminded me of John, my husband before the bank foreclosed on our farm. The same kindness, the same integrity. I couldn't bear destroying another honest man's life. The sound of approaching horses broke the tension. Sheriff Matthews's deputy rode hard into the yard, his news grim. "Carlton's men are moving on Thunder Basin, at least 20 riders, all armed. They're not even pretending it's legal anymore." Elizabeth's composure cracked further. "You fools don't understand. What's really at stake? Whitmore doesn't just want your water, he wants to own every drop from here to the Pacific. The Triple Crown is the key to controlling the entire territory." Samuel held up Mary's letter. "We understand perfectly now. Your sisters explained it all, including Whitmore's plans for after he owns the water rights. How many small ranchers will survive when he controls both the railroad and the water?" "Mary's always been weak," Elizabeth spat, "too sentimental by half. It's why we had to stage the deaths of her children, to give her the anger she needed." The words died in her throat as she realized what she'd revealed. Samuel's face went pale with fury. "Her children aren't dead? Another one of your lies?" "They're alive," Mary's letter confirmed, "in a Chicago boarding school, hostages to ensure my cooperation. But I've sent proof of Whitmore's crimes to the territorial governor. My children will be safer with him exposed than playing along with this scheme." Thomas studied the gathered faces. "So now we know. The real fight isn't with Carlton or even you ladies. It's with Whitmore and his railroad empire." "You can't beat him," Elizabeth said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "He owns judges from here to Chicago, controls more money than you can imagine." "Maybe," Jackson replied, "but he's never faced men fighting for their land and their honor. And now, thanks to Mary, we know exactly who we're fighting." Samuel carefully folded Mary's letter. "The question is, what happens next? Carlton's men are still coming. Whitmore's still pulling strings, and somewhere out there, Mary's running for her life." "No," Thomas corrected grimly. "The real question is, how many of Whitmore's secrets did Mary take with her? And what will Elizabeth and Sarah do now that their sisters switched sides?" The answer came with the sound of more approaching horses, and the distinctive click of Elizabeth drawing a hidden derringer from her sleeve. Sheriff Matthews' warning notice was nailed to every post on Main Street. "By order of territorial law, all armed persons entering town must register at the sheriff's office. Violators will be considered hostile." But the 30 riders who thundered into Cheyenne that morning paid it no mind, their Winchester rifles gleaming dully in the summer sun. Elizabeth's derringer had sparked a desperate struggle in Samuel's study, ended only when Thomas managed to disarm her. Now she sat bound in a chair, her refined demeanor stripped away to reveal the hardened survivor beneath. "You have no idea what's coming," she warned. "Whitmore doesn't send men to register weapons. He sends them to use them." The sheriff's deputy counted the new arrivals from the shelter of the telegraph office. "Carlton's bunch," he reported. "But different now. These aren't ranch hands. They're professional gunmen, recognized at least 3 faces from wanted posters." Jackson studied the town through his office window, noting how the strangers positioned themselves strategically around the main square. "They're securing approach routes," he said grimly. "Military precision. Whitmore's not hiring common thugs anymore." A cloud of dust on the horizon announced more riders approaching from the east. Samuel recognized Sarah among them, her riding habit abandoned for practical clothing that better suited her true nature. She led another group of armed men, these bearing the distinctive look of Chicago muscle. "Whitmore's not taking chances," Elizabeth observed with grim satisfaction. "That's Mitch Harding's crew with Sarah. They handled some of his difficulties in Nebraska. Very permanent solutions." Thomas's jaw tightened. "The woman I thought I married, leading hired killers against her own husband's land." "The woman you married never existed," Elizabeth replied coldly. "Sarah's been Whitmore's most loyal soldier since he saved her from hanging in St. Louis. She'll burn your whole ranch to the ground without blinking." The sheriff's next message arrived by rider, having observed the gathering forces from outside town. 40 more men at Thunder Basin. Carlton's there personally, directing them to dam the creek. Cattle drives completely cut off now. Samuel checked his watch. "Those cattle won't last another day without water. 200 head of prime stock, dying slow while Whitmore shows us what defiance costs." But the Triple Crown wasn't defenseless. Years of ranch work had built a network of loyal hands, men who'd fought Indians and rustlers beside their employers. They gathered now in the hills around town, armed and ready, waiting for signals from the 3 ranchers who'd never failed to stand by them. "Mary's still out there too," Thomas noted, watching the growing crowd through his rifle scope. "She knows Whitmore's operation better than anyone. Question is, which side is she playing now?" The answer came in an unexpected form. The telegraph operator sprinted from his office, clutching a message. "Governor's received Mary's evidence. Federal marshals are mounting up in Denver, but they're 2 days' ride out. We've got to hold till then." Elizabeth laughed bitterly. 2 days? Whitmore's men won't wait 2 hours. Once that sun sets, they'll move. By morning, the Triple Crown will be ashes, and your precious water rights will belong to the railroad. Jackson's voice remained steady. "Unless that's exactly what we want them to think. Mary didn't just take her evidence to the governor. She left us something too." He produced a stack of papers, copies of Whitmore's secret communications, including details of his operation's weaknesses. "Carlton's just the visible force," Samuel added, studying the documents. "The real threats, Sarah's bunch from Chicago. They're the ones trained for night work." A shot rang out in the growing dusk, shattering the window above Elizabeth's head. She didn't flinch. "That'll be Harding, demonstrating his impatience. He's not known for subtlety." Thomas checked his ammunition grimly. "Good, we're done with subtlety too." He met his friend's eyes. "Time to show them what happens when you push Wyoming ranchers too far." The sun settled toward the horizon, painting the town in shades of blood and gold. In the gathering shadows, armed men moved like wolves circling prey, while up in the hills, ranch hands awaited their orders. Somewhere in the chaos, Mary Morris held secrets that could destroy an empire, and Sarah Blackwood led killers against the man she'd married. The stage was set for a night of reckoning, with the future of the entire territory hanging in the balance. Thunder Basin's waters would run clear or red before dawn. There was no middle ground left. The deputy's badge caught the last rays of sunset as Sheriff Matthews pinned it to Jackson's vest. "By territorial law, you're now empowered to defend this town." The steel star felt heavy, its weight a reminder that they were no longer just ranchers defending private property. They were the law's last stand against Whitmore's invasion. Darkness fell like a curtain across the town, bringing with it the first probing attacks. Shots rang out from the shadows, testing the Triple Crown's defenses. Up on the ridge, Thomas's men held their fire, practicing the patience he'd taught them in breaking wild horses. "Sarah's leading them around the south fence," Thomas reported, returning from a scouting run. "She knows every weak spot in our security. 15 men with her, moving like professionals." Samuel's voice was grim in the darkness. "Mary warned us about this. First wave's a diversion. Harding's crew will hit Thunder Basin while we're tied up here." Through his rifle scope, Jackson watched Elizabeth in her makeshift cell at the sheriff's office. Even bound, she maintained her aristocratic posture, as if hosting a Boston Tea Party, rather than awaiting the outcome of her conspiracy. But her eyes kept straying to the window, watching the gathering shadows with growing tension. The first real assault came at midnight. Carleton's men rushed the North Road, trying to split the defenders' attention. But the Triple Crown hands knew their ground, had spent years learning every fold of this land. Rifle fire erupted from hidden positions, driving the attackers back with heavy losses. "That was too easy," Samuel warned. "They're probing, learning our positions." He was right. The next attack came from 3 directions at once, forcing them to spread their defenses thin. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the darkness, directing her men with the same skill she'd once shown with horses. "Fire the stables!" she commanded. "Drive them into the open!" Thomas's response was immediate, like hell. He led a countercharge that caught Sarah's incendiaries before they could reach the buildings. In the chaotic close-quarters fighting, husband and wife found themselves face to face for the first time since her betrayal. "It was never personal," Sarah said, her gun unwavering. "Just business." "Funny," Thomas replied. "That's exactly what I was thinking." His dive for cover coincided with his men opening fire, driving Sarah's group back into the shadows. At Thunder Basin, Samuel's foresight proved vital. Harding's Chicago professionals found their approach blocked by fallen trees and flooded ground. Channels dug days ago in preparation for exactly this attack. When they tried to force their way through, hidden ranch hands opened fire from prepared positions. "Mary's intel is paying off," Jackson observed, directing the town's defense from the sheriff's office. "She knew exactly how they'd come at us." Elizabeth's laugh was bitter. "My sister always was too clever for her own good, but she forgot the most important rule. Whitmore doesn't tolerate failure." As if summoned by her words, a new sound rose above the gunfire. Horses approaching at full gallop, riders emerged from the darkness, but not Whitmore's reinforcements. Mary Morris led a group of unexpected allies. Ranchers from across the territory, summoned by urgent messages and the shared threat to their water rights. "Whitmore's been buying judges and threatening small ranchers from here to Denver," Mary announced, swinging down from her horse. "Once I showed them the proof, they couldn't get here fast enough." The battle's tide turned with the new arrivals. Sarah's professionals found themselves caught between angry ranchers and Triple Crown defenders. Carleton's men, facing unexpected resistance, began to melt away into the night. But victory brought its own crisis. Sarah, cornered and desperate, made a final play. "Whitmore has my sister's children," she shouted to Mary. "Surrender now, or he'll kill them." "No, he won't." Mary's voice was calm as she produced another document. "Because right now, federal marshals are raiding his Chicago office. The governor sent them as soon as he saw the evidence." "It's over, sister." Elizabeth's composure finally cracked. "You fool! Do you know what he'll do to us?" "I know exactly what he'd do," Mary replied. "That's why I chose a different way. There are some things more important than money or revenge." The gunfire was dying now, replaced by the sounds of men surrendering or fleeing. Dawn wasn't far off, and with it would come the reckoning. For the Carson sisters, for Carleton's ambitions, and for Whitmore's empire built on stolen water rights. But first, they had to survive what promised to be the longest night in Triple Crown history. The territorial court documents spread across Judge Henderson's bench told the story. In careful legal language, in the matter of water rights jurisdiction, Thunder Basin District. But the real story lay in the faces of those gathered in Cheyenne's courthouse, ranchers standing shoulder to shoulder, Carson sisters in custody, and federal marshals fresh from their Chicago raid on Whitmore's empire. "The evidence is overwhelming," Judge Henderson declared, his voice carrying the weight of territorial law. "Systematic fraud, attempted theft of water rights, conspiracy to deprive legal owners of property, and employment of armed men for criminal purposes." He paused, studying the defendants. But perhaps most damning are Mr. Whitmore's own records, detailing his plan to control the entire territory's water supply. Elizabeth maintained her proud bearing even in handcuffs, but Sarah slouched in. Defeat. Mary sat separately, her testimony against Whitmore having earned her a degree of consideration from the court. "Your Honor," the federal marshal interjected, "we've received confirmation from Chicago. Whitmore's arrest was just the beginning. We've uncovered similar schemes in 3 other territories. His entire railroad empire was built on stolen water rights." Samuel watched Mary's face as the marshal continued. "We also found 2 children in a Chicago boarding school, held under false names. They've been reunited with their grandmother. In Boston, only those who knew her well caught the slight tremor in Mary's composed expression. The judge's gavel cracked like summer thunder. "Carlton and his men will face charges for their armed assault. Those who fled can explain themselves to federal authorities." He turned his stern gaze to the sisters. "As for you 3, Your Honor," Jackson stepped forward, "before you pass sentence, we have a request regarding Mary Morris." Elizabeth's bitter laugh rang out. "Still soft, sister? Found someone else to protect you?" But Thomas spoke next, his voice carrying the hard-earned wisdom of breaking wild horses. Mary's testimony didn't just save the Triple Crown. She exposed corruption that threatened every honest rancher in the territory. That counts for something. The judge considered, reviewing the documents before him. "Mrs. Morris's cooperation has been noted, but these crimes cannot go unpunished." He shuffled through the papers, finding the crucial evidence. "However, given the circumstances and her instrumental role in bringing down Whitmore's conspiracy, I'm inclined toward leniency in her case." Sarah finally broke her silence. "You think you've won? Whitmore's just one man. The railroad has dozens, like him, all fighting for control of the West. This isn't over." "Maybe not," Samuel replied calmly. "But thanks to Mary's evidence, we know how to fight them now. Legal water rights, properly registered and defended. No more secret deals or midnight threats." The judge's sentences came down like hammer blows. Elizabeth and Sarah faced years in territorial prison for their roles in the conspiracy. Carlton and his captured men received similar terms. The federal marshals would transport Whitmore back to Chicago for trial, his empire crumbling as investigations spread. For Mary, the judgment was more nuanced. 5 years probation, the judge declared, during which you'll help the territorial authorities identify and prevent similar schemes. Your knowledge of these operations is valuable, Mrs. Morris. Use it to make amends. Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine painted the town in colors of renewal. The Triple Crown hands gathered around their employers, pride evident in their bearing. They'd defended more than just ranch land. They'd protected the future of honest water rights throughout the territory. "What happens now?" Thomas asked, watching Sarah and Elizabeth being led away to begin their sentences. "We rebuild," Jackson answered. "Strengthen our defenses, help our neighbors secure their rights, make sure no one else can threaten the territories." "Water again?" Samuel turned to Mary, who stood uncertainly at the courthouse steps. "The Triple Crown needs someone who understands ranch accounts, someone who knows how to spot fraud and protect what's honest. The job's yours, if you want it." "After everything I did?" Mary's composure cracked slightly. "Everything I helped." "Plan. You chose to make it right," Samuel replied. "That's what matters now." He paused, then added softly, "And when your children arrive from Boston, they'll find a home waiting. If you're willing to trust us one more time." The court documents would be filed away in territorial records, legal proof of their victory. But the real triumph was written in the faces of those gathered on the courthouse steps. Honest ranchers standing together, protecting their land and water rights against all who would steal them. The Triple Crown had survived its greatest test, emerging stronger for the struggle. And in the end, truth and justice had found their way home to Wyoming territory, as sure as water flowing down from Thunder Basin's healing springs. The church registry page remained blank before Reverend Mills, its lines waiting to record what many considered impossible, a true marriage growing from the ashes of deception. Mary stood beside Samuel in the same church where she'd first deceived him, but everything else had changed. "Are you certain about this?" the Reverend asked softly, his pen hovering over the registry. "The territory's memory is long as the truth," Samuel replied, his hand steady on Mary's arm. In the front pew, two children watched with solemn eyes, Timothy, 10, and Sarah, 8, their faces showing their mother's features softened by innocence. They'd arrived from Boston 3 months ago, into a world vastly different from Whitmore's carefully controlled boarding school. "The truth is what matters now," Mary said, her voice carrying none of its old artificial refinement. "My children need to see that redemption is possible if you're willing to work for it." The past months had proven her words. Mary's knowledge of financial fraud had helped the territorial authorities uncover 3 more attempts at water rights theft. Her testimony in Denver had strengthened the case against Whitmore, whose empire was crumbling under federal investigation. Elizabeth and Sarah watched these developments from their prison cells with very different reactions. Elizabeth maintained her proud defiance, refusing all visitors except her lawyer. But Sarah had begun writing letters, first to Thomas, then to the other ranchers she'd wronged. Letters full of painful honesty about her role in Whitmore's schemes. "She's trying," Thomas told the others during their weekly Triple Crown meetings. "Maybe that counts for something, even if trust can never be rebuilt." The Triple Crown itself had emerged stronger from its trial by fire. The ranch hands who'd fought to defend it now held an ownership stake, their loyalty rewarded with a share in the operation they'd helped save. Water flowed freely again from Thunder Basin, nourishing not just cattle but a new spirit of cooperation among neighboring ranches. Jackson had taken the lead in establishing a territorial water rights association, using Mary's expertise to create safeguards against future theft attempts. "The railroad's still coming," he'd remind them, "but this time we'll meet it with law and unity, not threats and corruption." Now, watching Mary and Samuel stand before the Reverend, he understood something deeper about redemption. It wasn't just about making amends. It was about building something new from the lessons of the past. Timothy and Sarah Morris were learning those lessons too. The boy had his mother's head for numbers, but was using it to help Samuel track cattle bloodlines. The girl, whom Whitmore had used as a hostage, was slowly discovering the joy of riding horses under Thomas's gentle guidance. "This isn't just a marriage," Samuel had explained to his friends. "It's a chance to show that good can come from even the darkest deceptions, if we're brave enough to face the truth and do the work of rebuilding." The church registry page began to fill with witness signatures. Jackson's name, written with the same careful deliberation he gave to water rights documents. Thomas's bold strokes, steady as his hand on the reins. Even the sheriff added his signature, officially marking the transformation of Mary from conspirator to valued member of the community. "It won't be easy," Mary had told her children the night before. "Some people will never forget what I was part of, but they'll also see what I choose to be now." The territorial prison reports arrived monthly, tracking the fates of those who'd chosen different paths. Elizabeth had already attempted one escape, her old skills turned desperate in confinement. Sarah spent her days in the prison library, reading about horse breeding and writing her lengthy confessions. Carlton's captured men faced their own judgments, while those who'd fled found themselves hunted by federal marshals across the territories. Whitmore's Chicago trial was making headlines, revealing decades of corruption that had shaped the American West. But here in the simple wooden church, witnessed by those who'd lived through deception to find truth, a different story was being written. The registry recorded not just a marriage, but a testament to the possibility of change. "Marriage," Reverend Mills began, his voice carrying to the last pew, "is built on trust freely given and earned daily through actions." He met Mary's eyes. "Some would say that trust, once broken, can never be repaired, but others know that the strongest bonds are often forged in the crucible of forgiveness." Samuel's hand tightened on Mary's as the Reverend spoke. They'd chosen this path with clear eyes, understanding both its difficulty and its promise. In the front pew, two children watched their mother stepping from shadow into light, learning that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and truth. The new Triple Crown partnership agreement bore little resemblance to the original document that had hung in Jackson's study. Its carefully worded provisions reflected hard-learned lessons about trust, protection, and the true meaning of shared ownership. Mary's precise handwriting had added margin notes about water rights and safeguards, while Samuel's annotations detailed profit-sharing with the hands who'd fought to save the ranch. "This is more than a business document," Jackson explained to the gathered ranch hands. "It's our pledge to each other and to the future of this land." The morning sun streamed through his study windows, highlighting the faces of men who'd proved their loyalty with rifles and courage. Bill Hawkins, their oldest hand, studied the profit-sharing clause with weathered fingers. "Never thought I'd see my name on something like this. Means a man's got a real stake in what he's protecting." Thomas had contributed a section on horse breeding programs, incorporating some of Sarah's better ideas while carefully protecting against future vulnerabilities. "We learned which parts were poison," he'd said quietly. "But that doesn't mean everything she knew about horses was wrong." The Triple Crown's reputation had actually grown stronger through the crisis. Other ranchers sought their advice on protecting water rights, and Mary's financial expertise helped create a territory-wide system for verifying property claims. The railroad would still come. Progress couldn't be stopped, but it would come on the territory's terms, not through theft and corruption. Samuel and Mary's marriage had settled into something genuine, built on shared understanding of past mistakes and future possibilities. Timothy and Sarah had become fixtures at the ranch, the boy learning cattle operations, while his sister showed a natural gift with horses that sometimes brought tears to Thomas's eyes. "She rides like I once claimed to," Sarah had written in one of her prison letters. "But she does it honestly, without pretense. Maybe that's what I should have been all along." Elizabeth's latest letter to Jackson had struck a different tone. "You think you've won, but men like Whitmore will always exist. The West isn't meant for simple ranchers anymore." He'd filed it away with the other evidence, seeing now how her refined mask had hidden a soul that couldn't understand the strength of honest work and genuine connections. The autumn cattle drive proved the partnership's true worth. 2,000 head moved across newly secured grazing lands, watched over by men who now owned a share of every beef. The Triple Crown brand had come to mean something more than just cattle. It represented a way of doing business that balanced profit with principle. Mary rode with the drive, her city-learned accounting skills now complemented by practical ranch experience. "The numbers matter," she told Samuel, "but not as much as the people behind them." Her children watched from the ridgeline as their mother helped guide the herd, seeing her find purpose in honest work. Thomas had begun working with other ranchers' sons, teaching horse-breaking techniques that Sarah had once pretended to know. "There's art in gentling a wild thing," he'd explain, "but it only works if both sides choose to trust." The younger men understood he wasn't just talking about horses. Jackson's Water Rights Association had grown into a powerful force for protecting small ranchers. The courthouse now displayed a map showing certified water claims throughout the territory, each one verified against the techniques Mary had taught them to prevent fraud. "We're not just ranchers anymore," Samuel reflected during a quiet evening. "We're guardians of something bigger." Mary's hand found his as they watched the sunset paint Thunder Basin's waters in gold and crimson. The Triple Crown story had spread through the territories, a warning to those who would steal what honest people had built. But it also carried another message, about redemption, about second chances earned through hard work and truth. Even Sarah's prison letters had begun showing signs of change. She wrote of watching younger inmates, seeing her past self in their schemes and deceptions. "Perhaps," she'd written to Thomas, "teaching them a better way is my path to making amends." The new partnership agreement's final clause, written in Jackson's steady hand, summed up their hard-won wisdom. The Triple Crown stands not just for 3 ranches joined, but for the 3 pillars of our future: honest work, true partnership, and water flowing free for all who respect its worth. As autumn deepened toward winter, the ranch hands gathered for the ceremony of signing the new agreement. Each signature represented a stake in the land they'd fought to protect, and a commitment to the principles they'd learned to value above mere profit. The Morris family Bible lay open on Samuel's desk, its pages recording more than just births and deaths. Between the verses, careful annotations told the story of redemption, Mary's second marriage date, Timothy and Sarah's adoption into the Triple Crown family, and the baptism of Samuel and Mary's new daughter Hope, born in the spring of their 2nd year together. 1 year had passed since the night of fire and judgment that had nearly destroyed everything. The Triple Crown had not only survived, but thrived, its example reshaping how the territory thought about water rights and trust. The railroad had finally come, but on terms negotiated with respect rather than threatened with violence. Elizabeth served her sentence in dignified isolation, refusing all attempts at reconciliation. But Sarah had earned privileges through her work with young inmates, teaching them that the hardest trail to ride was the one leading back to honor. Thomas sometimes read her letters to the hands as object lessons about choosing the right path. Jackson had married again, this time to the widow of a rancher whose water rights had been saved by their association. Their quiet courtship, built on shared values and honest intentions, stood in stark contrast to the deceptions of the past. Timothy, now 11, had his mother's head for numbers, but his stepfather's love of the land. He'd started his own cattle ledger, tracking the bloodlines of a small herd Samuel had given him to manage. Young Sarah's gift with horses had blossomed under Thomas's guidance, her gentle touch with wild colts healing something in both teacher and student. The family Bible's newest entry recorded another kind of birth, the founding of the territories. First Water Rights Council, with Mary as its chief auditor. Her knowledge of fraud, once used to destroy, now helped protect honest ranchers across the West. The past doesn't have to define us, she'd written in the margin. It's the choices we make today that matter. On quiet evenings, Samuel would sometimes find Mary at his desk, adding notes to the Bible's family record. Not just dates and names, but wisdom earned through hard experience. About trust rebuilt through actions, not words. About the strength found in facing truth. About love that grows stronger for having been tested by fire. The Triple Crown brand had come to mean something special in the territory, a symbol of resilience, redemption, and the power of choosing right over easy. Its water still flowed free, nourishing not just cattle and crops, but the hope that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and truth. In the end, what had begun as a story of deception had become something else entirely, a testament to the enduring strength of honor, the possibility of redemption, and the understanding that true love, like the finest steel, often emerges stronger from the forge of adversity. The family Bible would pass down these lessons to future generations, teaching them that every life, like every river, holds the potential for both destruction and renewal. The choice, as always, lies in how we direct its flow.